The shy teen steps onto the AGT stage, nervous, barely speaking. But the moment he opens his mouth, the entire theater goes silent. Simon Cowell freezes, Heidi gasps, and the crowd erupts. Nobody expected this Filipino Elvis to deliver a voice so powerful it breaks the internet in seconds. The lights dimmed across the AGT stage, leaving only a single spotlight swaying slightly above the center. The audience murmured, a mixture of curiosity and impatience, as the stage remained empty for a few long seconds. From the back of the theater, the doors slowly creaked open, and a small figure appeared, hesitantly stepping into the light. Every eye in the room instinctively followed him. He was slender, dressed in a simple shirt and jeans, gripping a vintage silver microphone as if it were the most precious thing in the world. His shoes shuffled nervously against the polished stage floor, but his eyes, wide and trembling, burned with a quiet determination. The judges leaned in, sensing something different about this audition. Simon Cowell squinted, the signature frown creasing his forehead, trying to read the young man's demeanor. Heidi Klum tilted her head slightly, her brows furrowed. In concern. Howie Mandel, ever the animated one, whispered under his breath, "Wow. He looks terrified." The audience, meanwhile, exchanged confused glances. Some chuckled softly, others whispered guesses to their neighbors, and a few simply watched in silence, unsure of what to expect. The boy reached the center of the stage and froze for a heartbeat, closing his eyes as if drawing strength from some unseen source. The microphone felt heavy in his hands, though he gripped it firmly. He lifted his head and spoke in a voice barely audible over the soft hum of the audience. "My name is Leo, but people back home call me the Filipino Elvis." A ripple ran through the crowd. Some laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking. Others murmured excitedly, leaning forward as if this name alone carried a story. Simon's eyes narrowed, a mix of skepticism and intrigue crossing his face. "Filipino Elvis?" he repeated, his voice carrying both curiosity and a challenge. Heidi offered a small, encouraging smile, while Howie's jaw dropped slightly, as though he couldn't decide whether to laugh or be amazed. One man in the audience shouted, "Then show us!" Leo's hands shook slightly, but he didn't rasp. "Und," verbally. Instead, he closed his eyes again, whispering something inaudible, a private mantra only he could hear. For a moment, the theater was suspended in silence, as if holding its breath. Then, a gentle, almost fragile whisper escaped his lips. "Papa, this is for you." The words were so quiet that most of the audience couldn't catch them, but the emotion behind them was undeniable. "The Jew." DJs exchanged glances. Heidi's hand flew instinctively to her chest. Simon's eyes narrowed further, and Howie's lips parted, clearly moved even before a single note had been sung. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and the soft pluck of a guitar filled the background. The music was simple, stripped down, emotional, a stark contrast to the show's usual grandeur. The audience leaned forward, instinctively, sensing that something rare was about to unfold. Leo opened his mouth, and the first note floated into the air, delicate, smooth, and impossibly pure. It was a sound that seemed far too big to come from someone so small, so unassuming. The crowd went silent, every person straining to listen. The mother seated near the front pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes widening as the sound penetrated the theater. A cameraman momentarily lowered his camera, caught off guard by the sheer perfection of the note. Simon Cowell's eyes widened incrementally, as though he were trying to process what he was hearing, attempting to reconcile his skepticism with the undeniable reality. Heidi whispered, almost to herself, "Wow!" Howie's face lit up with an incredulous grin, shaking his head as if to say, "I can't believe this." Leo's voice carried the song with a subtle vulnerability at first, every note infused with emotion, each one building layer upon layer. His control was flawless, the clarity of his tone creating a ripple of awe through the audience. He held a high note that seemed impossible, a note so pure it caused several members of the crowd to gasp involuntarily. The wisp. Chorus of admiration began to spread, faint at first, then louder. This is amazing. How is he doing that? He sounds like..." But they didn't finish the thought. Nobody had words for what they were hearing. As the song progressed, the tension in the theater became palpable. The initial skepticism of the audience had dissolved into a captivated silence, and slowly, the first members began to stand. The music swelled just slightly, enough to allow the emotion of the song to hit even harder. Leo's hands gripped the microphone tightly, knuckles white, but his voice was steady, unshakable, commanding the stage in a way his body language had not yet hinted at. Simon's frown deepened, replaced by a look of awe. He leaned back in his chair, visibly trying to control his reaction, yet unable to hide the astonishment in his eyes. Heidi's chest rose and fell rapidly. She looked down briefly to compose herself before staring back at Leo in disbelief. Howie had a small laugh of disbelief escape him, shaking his head repeatedly, caught somewhere between joy and amazement. The camera panned over the audience, capturing expressions that ranged from tears welling up in the eyes of elderly NS to teenagers, leaning forward in total amazement. Some clutched their hands to their faces, others whispered fervently to their neighbors, but none dared to move in a way that might disrupt the magic unfolding on stage. And then it happened. Midway through the verse, Leo lifted his head slightly and hit a note so high, so crystal clear, that the entire theater erupted in a spontaneous standing ovation. Chairs scraped the floor, hands went up, and the sound of cheers filled the room. Even the judges, who were supposed to maintain their composure, were visibly shaken. Simon's eyes were wide. Heidi's hands flew to her mouth. Howie was shaking his head in disbelief. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. The shy, nervous teen had vanished, replaced by a performer who owned every inch of the stage. Each note seemed to carry the weight of his story, his loss, his dream, and his ambition. The audience was no longer just watching. They were experiencing something rare, something powerful, something viral in the making. The theater had transformed from a place of casual entertainment to a sacred space of awe. The music shifted subtly into a rhythm reminiscent of Elvis Presley, giving a nod to the persona Leo had embraced. The crowd gasped as they realized the performance was evolving, from tender, emotional vulnerability to controlled, electrifying showmanship. Yet, every note retained the purity and honesty that had first captured their hearts. The judges leaned forward, utterly captivated, their expressions frozen between disbelief and admiration. Simon's lips parted slightly as he muttered under his breath, I've never heard anything like this." By the end of the first scene, the theater was filled with a mixture of stunned silence and lingering excitement. The audience, now fully invested, whispered among themselves, "This kid is going to be legendary," while Leo stood tall, a faint smile forming despite his exhaustion, eyes glinting with the knowledge he had already captured every heart in the room. The soft, emotional notes from the first part of Leo's performance began to fade, replaced by a rising beat that sent an unexpected energy through the theater. The gentle acoustic rhythm transformed into a driving Elvis-inspired groove, and with it, Leo's entire demeanor shifted. Where moments ago he had been nervous, uncertain, almost invisible, he now moved with a quiet confidence, his body naturally swaying to the rhythm. He bent his knees slightly, planting his feet firmly, and began to glide across the stage with a subtle but undeniable swagger. Every gesture, every tilt of his head, every lift of the microphone was deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had stepped out of the shadows and into the spotlight of history. The audience gasped, almost in unison. Some leaned forward in their seats, while others sat frozen, unable to tear their eyes from the young performer, who had just transformed before their very eyes. Hands flew to mouths, jaws dropped, and whispers spread like wildfire. "Is this real? It can't be. He looks so shy, but he's incredible." The shift from vulnerability to showmanship was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, and the energy in the room seemed to pulse in sync with Leo's movements. Heidi's eyes widened, her hand gripping the armrest instinctively as though holding herself together. "Unbelievable," she whispered, almost to herself, unable to contain the awe creeping into her voice. Howie's face lit up with a mixture of disbelief and joy. He shook his head slowly, grinning from ear to ear, clearly unable to process the transformation he was witnessing. Simon Cowell, always the composed critic, leaned forward in his chair, resting one hand on his chin, but his expression betrayed him entirely. The shock in his eyes was undeniable. The music surged, and Leo began to hit higher, more daring notes, blending classic Elvis growls with his own soulful vibrato. Each note was perfectly controlled, carried with emotion, yet infused with the energy of rock and roll. The crowd rose slightly in anticipation, sensing the performance was reaching a tipping point. A few audience members gasped audibly, while others began whispering excitedly to their neighbors. Leo's voice had evolved from raw emotion to confident command. He had gone from a timid teen to a force of nature, and the Atre was powerless to look away. He swiveled his hips gently, a nod to the Elvis persona, while keeping his tone flawless and emotional. His right hand gripped the mic stand, tilting it slightly for dramatic effect, while his left hand gestured subtly toward the audience, inviting them into his performance. The cameras cut to close-ups of the crowd, a teenage girl covering her mouth, wide-eyed, a man leaning forward with both hands clutched in disbelief, a mother wiping tears from her eyes, clearly moved by the emotion. Even backstage, crew members leaned out of the wings, their jaws dropping. The magic of this moment had spread beyond the stage, reaching everyone present. As the chorus approached, Leo's voice soared even higher, effortlessly navigating complex runs and sustaining notes. Hat seemed impossible for someone of his age. The rhythm of the song grew faster, the iconic guitar riffs echoing through the theater. It was as if the very spirit of Elvis had merged with the young Filipino singer, creating a fusion that was simultaneously nostalgic and electrifyingly fresh. The audience's applause grew louder, spontaneous and uncontrollable, with clapping matching the beats of music. The standing ovation that had begun in Scene 1 now spread like wildfire. The energy was contagious. Simon's hand instinctively rose to his mouth, a sign of his disbelief, while Heidi's eyes shimmered with tears. Howie clutched his chest, laughing and shaking his head in amazement. Each judge's reaction amplified the audience's emotions, and it was clear that Leo had captured every single heart in the room. Every camera angle seemed to focus on someone astonished, whether it was a fan in the front row, a staff member backstage, or one of the judges. Every reaction validated the impossible reality unfolding on stage. This shy teen had become a viral legend before their very eyes. Leo moved closer to the edge of the stage, leaning slightly into the audience, hitting a sustained number that vibrated through the theater. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, some rising to their feet, others banging the rails in excitement. The moment was electric, almost surreal. A shy teenager had commanded a stage usually reserved for legends. His timing, his rhythm, his voice, and his presence combined to create a performance that transcended age, background, and expectation. As song progressed, Leo added subtle improvisations, echoing classic Elvis riffs but never losing his own style. He incorporated small gestures, a flick of the wrist, a soft sway, a head tilt, that made the performance feel dynamic and alive. The energy in the room built like a crescendo, as though the audience itself were caught in the swell of his voice. The whispering of awe had now transformed into uncontainable exclamations. "Oh my God, he's incredible. That's unreal." At the midpoint, Leo hit the high note he had been teasing, the note that seemed impossible for anyone, let alone a teenager. The theater collectively inhaled, every jaw dropped, every eye locked on him. He held it just long enough to let the room explode in cheers and applause before smoothly transitioning back. Then to the rhythm, showing control and mastery that left the judges stunned. Simon's hand hovered near the golden buzzer, unable to resist the impulse, though he still held back, testing the limits of his own disbelief. The crowd's energy was contagious. Audience members waved their hands, shouted encouragement, and some began clapping along to the beat. Leo's voice carried over it all, blending precision, and the kind of charisma that only legends possess. The shy teen that had entered the stage was gone. In his place stood someone who owned the room, someone who demanded attention without asking for it, someone who had created a viral moment in real time. As the final notes of the scene approached, Leo bent slightly, eyes closed, microphone held to his lips with reverence. The moo. Six softened, giving the audience a moment to breathe, but the impact of his transformation lingered in the air like electricity. Simon's expression softened slightly, a mixture of awe and admiration. Heidi's smile was radiant but teary, and Howie simply shook his head, muttering to himself, "I can't. This is insane." The audience remained on their feet, clapping, cheering, and in disbelief still, processing the incredible journey they had just witnessed. The scene ended with a lingering note, held perfectly by Leo, the final echo reverberating through the theater. The camera cut to the crowd one last time, capturing astonished faces, wet eyes, and hands still raised in applause. In those moments it was undeniable. The shy teen had transformed into something extraordinary, and the world had taken notice. Scene 2 concluded with anticipation, tension, and excitement. Every viewer was now hooked, eagerly waiting for the next unforgettable golden buzzer moment. The final notes of Leo's transformation still lingered in the theater, vibrating in the air like a powerful echo that refused to fade. The audience, already on its feet from Scene 2, erupted in spontaneous applause, cheers, and whistles. But it was clear that everyone felt something greater than mere entertainment. They had witnessed something historic. The shy teen who had entered the stage moments ago had become a force of nature. His voice had carried emotion, power, and precision that no one had expected, leaving the judges and audience alike in a state of disbelief. Simon Cowell, always the skeptic, remained motionless for a heartbeat longer than anyone thought possible. His hand hovered in the air near the golden buzzer, as if waiting for the universe to confirm that this was real. His eyes, wide and unblinking, tracked every movement of Leo's body, every subtle flick of the wrist, every controlled note. The disbelief on his face was palpable. He had seen who, in dreads of auditions, yet this was something he had never imagined. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head slowly as he fought to contain the overwhelming surge of emotion. Heidi Klum's expression was just as profound. She was biting her lip, hands trembling slightly as she covered her mouth to stifle the gasp escaping her lips. A single tear escaped her eye and trickled down her cheek, and for the first time all season she allowed herself to be completely consumed by a moment of pure awe. Howie Mandel, usually animated and vocal, was unusually silent, his eyes fixed on Leo as he leaned forward, shaking his head in disbelief. He muttered, almost to himself, This is unreal," repeating the words as if to convince himself that it was happening in real life. Leo, standing at the center of the stage, had reached the culmination of his performance. His body still moved with fluid confidence, his feet planted firmly as if drawing strength from the floor itself. The microphone felt lighter now, almost as if it were part of him, an extension of his voice. He lifted his head slightly, his eyes sweeping across the audience. There was no nervousness left. In its place stood a quiet pride, an awareness that he had accomplished something extraordinary. Every person in the theater, from the front row to the back, felt it. The air seemed electric, almost vibrating with the combined energy of the crowd, the judges, and Leo himself. The first final notes rang out, sustained, flawless, and emotionally charged. The audience erupted once more, a crescendo of sound that seemed to shake the theater. Hands were thrown into the air, some clapping, others holding phones high to capture what they knew would become a viral moment. In unison, the cheers transformed into chants of Leo's name, the rhythm of the applause matching the tempo of his final notes. He leaned slightly forward, tilting the microphone to emphasize the climactic sound, his body swaying to the rhythm, fully embodying the persona he had embraced. Simon's movement was slow but deliberate. He rose from his chair, the hand that had hovered now decisively pressing the golden buzzer. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity. The sound of the buzzer resonated through the theater, accompanied by a dramatic burst of confetti that rained down over the stage like a glittering waterfall. The audience erupted in ecstatic celebration, a wave of emotion that was equal parts shock, admiration, and joy. Simon's expression softened as he finally allowed a smile to break through, tears glinting at the corners of his eyes. Heidi jumped up, her hands flinging wide as she rushed toward Leo, enveloping him in an emotional hug. "You have such an incredible soul," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Howie, almost dancing in excitement, added, "Golden buzzer. This is exactly what this show is about." Their reactions reflected the sentiment of the entire audience. This was more than just a performance, it was a moment of pure magic. Leo's expression, a mix of disbelief, relief, and pride, was captivating. He clasped the microphone with both hands, momentarily speechless. His eyes scanned the audience, lingering on the family members in the front row, their faces awash with tears and pride. His mother clutched her hands to her chest, unable to speak, while his father's eyes glimmered with unshed tears. Friends and fellow performers backstage were already hugging one another, sharing quiet exclamations of amaze. Meant. Even the crew members, often unseen and unheard, were caught in the spell, whispering and pointing in astonishment. The music swelled one last time, carrying a dramatic crescendo as Leo delivered the final sustained note of the night. His voice, rich and resonant, filled every corner of the theater, wrapping the audience in an emotional embrace. The final chord lingered, seemingly suspended, in midair, and then slowly faded, leaving behind a silence so profound that it only lasted a heartbeat before being replaced by uproarious applause. People were jumping, cheering, and clapping. Phones were raised high, capturing the moment that would go viral across the world. The judges, still standing, applauded vigorously. Simon Cowell, ever the perfectionist, finally allowed himself to speak. "I've seen thousands of auditions, but this was impossible. You just blew my mind completely." Heidi, still holding Leo's shoulders, whispered, "You're a legend." Howie's exuberance could barely be contained. "I knew it the second you hit that note. Golden buzzer all the way." Leo's hands shook slightly as he raised the microphone once more to acknowledge the audience. "Thank you. Thank you all," he whispered, his voice quivering with emotion. I didn't think I could do this, but you all made me believe." The crowd cheered even louder, a wave of adoration washing over him. It was the culmination of years of practice, fear, hope, and talent, all condensed into a single, unforgettable performance. As the confetti settled and the cameras panned over the stunned and elated faces of the audience, the judges, and the family, it was clear that this moment would not be forgotten. Social media would erupt within minutes. Clips of Leo's performance were already destined to go viral worldwide. The shy teen from the Philippines had not only conquered the stage but had captured hearts across the globe. He had become, in every sense, a viral legend. The scene concluded with a slow-motion shot of Leo taking a bow, smiling through tears of happiness, while the theater continued to cheer. Text appeared across the screen, "A star is born." The applause continued to echo as the camera pulled back, capturing the grandeur of the moment. A shy teen had walked in nervously, but he left as a true icon, his voice immortalized in the hearts of all who it nested.